Imagine stumbling upon a locked cellar door, buried beneath the Appalachian clay, its iron hinges rusted with decades of silence, a door that, according to town records, should not exist. When it was forced open in 1924, the men who pried it loose swore never to speak of what they saw. The sheriff resigned, a priest abandoned his congregation, and the children of the town began to vanish one by one. This is not a story of ghosts, nor is it a tale of folklore. It is the unspoken history of a family whose cruelty carved scars into the mountains themselves, the Harpewell family. Their name has been erased from documents, scratched from gravestones, buried beneath centuries of shame. But silence does not kill memory. The truth remains, rotting like meat left in the sun. Tonight, we will open that cellar door again. The Appalachian Mountains are a landscape of beauty and brutality. Rolling hills conceal valleys where voices echo too long, where the earth seems to swallow secrets whole. For generations, families carved lives from coal, timber, and stone. But in every community, there was always one household you did not speak of. One family whose land you did not cross. In Harpewell Hollow, that family reigned in silence. Locals whispered that the Harpewells were different, not merely cruel, but unnatural. Their children never seemed to age the same as others. Their sermons, though held in a chapel built by their own hands, contained words not found in Scripture, and every few winters another orphan would disappear, as if the mountain itself demanded payment. But the townsfolk never questioned too loudly. To survive in Appalachia was to understand that silence often meant safety. The Harpewells arrived in 1819, traveling from Virginia into the deeper wilderness of Kentucky's mountains. Records suggest they came with wealth, silver crosses, imported books, slaves bought and sold long after abolition was whispered through the hills. Yet what disturbed the locals was not their wealth, but their unity. Every Harpewell seemed bound to one another by more than blood, as if some pact had been signed generations before. Their patriarch, Elias Harpewell, was a towering man who spoke with both gentleness and cruelty, often in the same breath. He preached to his family that the mountain had chosen them, that its soil was made fat with sacrifice. For outsiders, Elias wore the mask of hospitality, but those who crossed him, or worse, questioned him, simply vanished. No court ever charged the Harpewells. No neighbor dared accuse them. Fear is the oldest law in Appalachia. At the edge of Harpewell land stood their chapel, a warped, leaning structure of timber carved with unholy symbols no one in the town could translate. Inside, candles dripped onto pews carved with grooves as though fingers had clawed at them. Outsiders who visited reported strange chanting, a language that seemed almost biblical but bent into something older, more guttural. Children from the town claimed they could hear hymns at night, not of God, but of hunger. By the 1840s, whispers spread that the Harpewells held midnight gatherings where no outsiders were welcome. Some claimed to see torches snaking up the hollow, others swore they heard screams carried on the wind. Yet the local church, eager to avoid conflict, declared the Harpewells a pious and private people. In truth, the chapel was less a house of worship and more an altar to something nameless, buried beneath the mountain stone. The first recorded disappearance tied to the Harpewells occurred in 1827. An orphan boy, Henry Mason, vanished from a county-run poorhouse. Weeks later, his boots were found in Harpewell Hollow, neatly placed outside the chapel door. The sheriff investigated, but no charges followed. By 1833, 3 more orphans were gone, all from institutions within traveling distance. Each time, evidence surfaced near Harpewell land, yet no one dared challenge Elias. Parents warned their children not to wander into the hollow, but curiosity is a cruel instinct. Stories spread of boys who snuck into the woods and never returned. Girls claimed to hear a woman's voice calling their names from the tree line. It was as if the Harpewells were not merely stealing bodies, but devouring innocence itself. In time, even the state orphanages looked the other way. Better to lose a few nameless children than spark open war with a family who lived like kings in the mountains. By the 1840s, hunters and loggers began finding shallow graves scattered in the ridges near Harpewell Hollow. Most were children. No headstones, no records, just tiny bones folded into Appalachian clay. The townsfolk whispered, but the sheriff, whose own son had married into the Harpewell clan, refused to investigate. Ministers from nearby counties urged the community to denounce the Harpewells, but their warnings were silenced with coin or with threats. One schoolteacher who dared accuse Elias in public was found hanging in his own barn, his tongue carved out. His death was declared a suicide. His widow swore otherwise. By then it was clear the Harpewells were not merely cruel, they were untouchable. Their cruelty was sanctioned by the very institutions meant to protect the innocent. The mountain itself seemed to favor them. By 1851, an unspoken arrangement had formed between Kentucky's overrun orphanages and the Harpewells. When too many children crowded the poorhouses, certain names would be lost in the records. Those children would never be seen again. In exchange, donations arrived at the orphanages in heavy trunks, barrels of coal, sacks of flour, sometimes even money traced back to Harpewell land. The deal was so secret, so deeply buried, that even decades later, officials denied its existence. Yet survivors who grew up in those institutions remember the nights when wagons came for the chosen. They remember the silence of the matrons, the fear in their eyes. And they remember the sound of iron wheels vanishing into the hollow, carrying children toward a chapel that was never meant for God. Accounts from drifters, wanderers, and escaped children described the same thing. The Harpewells spoke in a strange, choking tongue during their midnight rituals. One child, who managed to flee at 12 years old, claimed the language burned like smoke in the ears. Another survivor described seeing children placed in the chapel's center, surrounded by chanting family members until the screaming stopped. Linguists who later analyzed fragments of the words could find no match, not to Hebrew, not to Latin, not even to indigenous dialects. It was as if the Harpewells had preserved some forgotten speech, passed down since before the mountains even had a name. Witnesses reported that after each ritual, the soil of Harpewell Hollow seemed darker, as if stained. Some claimed it smelled faintly of iron. In 1862, a story emerged that still chills the region. A young bride named Margaret Fenton, newly arrived in town, was taken on her wedding night. The groom, drunk and staggering, swore he heard hooves outside their cabin. By morning, Margaret was gone, her veil torn, her shoes abandoned in the mud. Days later, townsfolk whispered they saw her pale figure walking hand in hand with Elias Harpewell, though Margaret's eyes were vacant as if hollowed out. She was never seen again outside Harpewell land. Women whispered that Margaret had been married again, not to a man, but to the hollow itself. That tale spread terror across the valleys, proof that the Harpewells did not merely hunger for children. They claimed brides, too. During the Civil War, the Harpewells thrived. While towns burned and soldiers starved, the family's land grew richer. Confederate deserters vanished near the hollow, their muskets later found stacked at the chapel door. Union scouts who ventured too close were never seen again. Both armies, wary of stirring the Harpewells' wrath, chose to avoid the region altogether. Official reports list the hollow as impassable terrain, though locals knew better. When the war ended, the Harpewells emerged untouched, as if chaos had only fattened them. Elias Harpewell, impossibly aged yet unbroken, declared that blood is the mountain's harvest. No one dared ask what he meant. By the late 1800s, new generations of Harpewells were born, but always within the family itself. Marriages outside the bloodline were rare, and whispers of inbreeding spread across neighboring towns. Yet the children born of these unions were not weak. They were strong, broad-shouldered, their eyes strangely luminous in firelight. Some claimed their pupils did not dilate like other men's. Others swore they did not bleed the same, thicker, darker. Rumors spread of infants who cried not with human voices, but with something lower, like an animal's growl. Town midwives who delivered Harpewell children never returned for a second birth. And still, the family grew, their numbers swelling in the hollow like locusts, until their name was spoken only in whispers. By the 1880s, fear of the Harpewells had become institutionalized. Schools near Harpewell Hollow refused to teach about the family. Local sheriffs passed their badges from father to son, all sworn to never tread the hollow. Newspapers refused to print their name. The family became an open wound, one the community wrapped in layers of silence. Preachers told their congregations to avoid gossip, claiming the mountain chooses what it keeps. Children grew up knowing only one rule: if you hear your name called from the tree line, do not answer. If you see a lantern swinging in the woods, do not follow. If you dream of the hollow, do not return. In 1891, a group of desperate townsfolk attempted what had never been done before. They stormed the Harpewell chapel with torches. They claimed to have heard the cries of children from within. Flames swallowed the structure quickly, but the screams did not stop. They grew louder. Witnesses swore the very timbers shrieked like living flesh. When the fire collapsed the roof, black smoke poured into the sky, curling into shapes like twisted hands. And yet, by dawn, the chapel stood again whole, untouched by fire. The men who lit the torches were found hanging from oak trees the next morning, their eyes burned black. The message was clear: the mountain would not allow its chosen to be destroyed. Section 14, the 20th century awakens. By 1901, whispers of the Harpewells had spread beyond Kentucky. Journalists, folklorists, and curious wanderers began investigating the family. Most never returned. Those who did brought back scraps of horrifying testimony. Children buried alive in earthen pits, women chained in cellars, sermons where voices rose in impossible unison. Yet no newspaper dared publish these accounts. Editors were bribed, threatened, or simply disappeared. One reporter's manuscript, recovered years later, contained a final line: "They do not worship the mountain worships them." His body was never found. In 1924, the truth nearly emerged. County workers, surveying land for a new mining operation, stumbled upon a hidden cellar beneath Harpewell Hollow. Its door was bolted from the outside, sealed with rusted iron. When they pried it open, the stench of death poured out. What they saw inside drove two men to madness. One gouged his own eyes, another shot himself within the week. The sheriff, arriving hours later, ordered the cellar resealed and erased from all records. But fragments remain, scribbled notes describing rows of tiny beds, chains in the walls, and a pit where the earth still moved. The cellar was not a prison, it was a harvest chamber. Between 1925 and 1932, an entire generation of children vanished from counties surrounding the hollow. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Orphanages reported fires that conveniently destroyed their records. Families who complained found their cabins burned to ash. In church registers, names of missing children were crossed out in thick ink. The Harpewells no longer bothered to hide their hunger. The entire region seemed to surrender its young, as though bound to a contract no outsider could see. And yet, no militia, no state police, no governor intervened. To this day, official records call it a period of migration. But the truth was simpler: it was feeding season. By the 1940s, the Harpewells themselves began to fade from public record, not because they were gone, but because history itself seemed rewritten. Court ledgers, census rolls, even grave markers were erased. It was as if the family never existed, yet locals still spoke of them in hushed tones, of lanterns glowing in the hollow, of screams carried through the fog. Survivors who tried to speak out were dismissed as mad. Scholars who traced the name Harpewell in old archives found entire pages torn out. It was not merely secrecy, it was erasure, an intentional, orchestrated forgetting. In 1947, the Harpewell Chapel reappeared. Travelers claimed to see its warped spire through the trees, lit by candlelight. Some even entered, though none emerged the same. One man, a war veteran, staggered into town days later with his hair turned completely white. He could not speak, only scratch symbols into walls until his fingernails tore away. Another woman was found miles from the hollow, barefoot and bleeding, repeating a single phrase: "The mountain is awake." Each survivor's testimony ended the same: the Harpewells were not gone. They had simply grown quieter, waiting. Today, the Harpewells are little more than rumor. Their hollow is marked on no maps, their name found in no census. Yet families in Appalachia still warn their children not to wander near forgotten trails. Orphanages long abandoned still echo with whispers, and if you dig in the wrong place, you may find bones curled like sleeping children, their mouths filled with soil. Scholars suggest the Harpewell story was folklore, a fabrication of mountain paranoia. But the Appalachian people know better. Legends are born from truth, and this legend is buried not in storybooks, but in the earth itself. And so we return to that cellar door, rusted, silent, waiting. The sheriff's men sealed it nearly a century ago, but the mountain shifts, wood rots, iron bends, sooner or later doors open. The Harpewells may be gone from history, but history is not gone from them. Their chapel still waits. Their bloodline may walk among us, hidden by new names, new faces, and their hunger, the hunger that swallowed generations of children, remains as alive as the soil beneath the hollow. Some families die out, some families are forgotten, but the cruelest families are eternal, and in Appalachia eternity is spelled in blood.